After funding her birthday party, my granddaughter shamed me for views. It didn't end well. The old house had been quiet for years, the kind of quiet that settles deep into the walls and furniture. The grandparent lived alone there, waking early each morning, moving slowly but with purpose. Life had become simple over time. A small garden in the back, tea in the afternoon, and phone calls that came less often than they used to. Still, family mattered more than anything. Even when days felt long, the thought of loved ones brought comfort. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. One afternoon, the phone rang while the grandparent was folding laundry. The name on the screen brought a small smile. It was the granddaughter. Her voice sounded excited, rushed, full of youth. She talked quickly about school, friends, and plans for her upcoming birthday. It was a big one, she said. She wanted something special, something everyone would remember. At first, the grandparent just listened. There was joy in hearing that energy, that hope. Then the request came, gently at first. The party she wanted was expensive. The decorations, the food, the place where it would be held, everything added up. Her parents were stressed, she said. Money was tight. She wondered if her grandparent could help. There was no long pause, no careful thinking out loud. The answer came naturally. Yes. Of course. The grandparent said it without hesitation, as if the decision had already been made before the question was asked. Money had always come and gone, but moments like these felt rare. Birthdays passed quickly. Childhood passed even faster. After the call ended, the grandparents sat quietly for a moment. They knew the cost would be high. Their income was fixed now. Each expense had to be planned carefully. Some comforts would need to be skipped. But none of that felt as important as the chance to be part of the granddaughter's happiness. In the following days, plans began to take shape. The grandparent visited stores, slowly walking down aisles filled with bright colors and shiny decorations. Balloons, banners, table covers. Some things were placed back on the shelf after checking the price. Others were added to the basket with a small nod, as if confirming the choice to themselves. At home, bills were reviewed more carefully than usual. Numbers were written down, crossed out, rewritten. A few non-essential things were postponed. The heating was turned down slightly. Favorite snacks were skipped. These were small sacrifices, hardly worth mentioning, but they added up quietly. The grandparent didn't share these details with anyone. There was no need. Giving was meant to be quiet. They believed that if you helped someone, you didn't remind them of the cost. Love was not meant to come with a receipt. When the time came to pay for the venue, the grandparent went in person. The place was lively, already busy with other events being planned. Young staff members spoke quickly, showing options, pointing at brochures. The grandparent nodded, asked a few questions, and agreed to the package the granddaughter wanted. The most complete one. The most expensive one. Signing the papers, their hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. Still, there was a feeling of pride. It felt good to still be able to provide, to still matter in a practical way. Food choices were discussed next. The granddaughter sent messages with lists and pictures. Trends changed fast, and some of the items were unfamiliar. The grandparent didn't fully understand why certain snacks were popular, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that the granddaughter felt heard. At night, alone in the quiet house, the grandparent thought about earlier years. About birthdays long ago, when money had also been tight, but joy had been easy to find. Homemade cakes. Laughter around small tables. Times had changed, but the wish behind celebrations felt the same. Sometimes there was a soft worry. A thought that came and went. Would this effort bring them closer? Would the granddaughter see the love behind it? The grandparent pushed those thoughts aside. Giving should not depend on outcomes. You give because you care, not because you expect something back. The days moved quickly. Phone calls came often now. Updates, changes, new ideas. The grandparent listened patiently, even when the plans became more detailed and more costly. Each time they agreed. Each time, they reminded themselves that memories were worth it. One afternoon, while standing in line at the bank, the grandparent overheard younger people talking about parties and social media, about videos and photos and online attention. It sounded like a different world. Still, the grandparents smiled to themselves. Even if they didn't fully understand it, they trusted their granddaughter. At home, they placed the decorations carefully in a spare room, keeping them neat and clean. Balloons still in their packages. Shiny letters spelling out a message. It felt like holding a promise. A promise of a happy day ahead. Neighbors noticed the extra trips out and asked questions. The grandparents spoke proudly about the upcoming birthday. Their eyes lit up as they talked. It felt good to be involved, to have something to look forward to. On a quiet evening, the grandparents sat with a cup of tea and reviewed their budget once more. The numbers were tight. There would be no room for mistakes for a while. Still, there was no regret. Only a calm acceptance. Life was not about holding on to everything. It was about knowing when to give. They thought about the granddaughter as a small child, holding their hand while learning to walk. About school plays and simple drawings given as gifts. Time had moved fast. This party felt like another step in her growing up. The grandparent hoped the celebration would be full of laughter. That the granddaughter would feel special, supported, loved. That even if nothing else came from it, that feeling would last. As the final payments were made, the grandparent felt a mix of tiredness and quiet satisfaction. The work was done. The choice had been made. Whatever happened next would happen. That night, before going to bed, the grandparent said a small prayer. Not for thanks or recognition, but for the happiness of their family. For peace. For moments that mattered. The house returned to its usual quiet, but something had changed. There was a sense of purpose in the air. A reminder that even in later years, love could still be given freely. And sometimes that was enough. The day of the party arrived faster than expected. The grandparent woke early, even though there was no need to rush. Sleep had been light the night before, filled with small thoughts and quiet anticipation. They dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that felt neat and comfortable. Nothing flashy. Just something appropriate for being part of a family moment. When they arrived at the venue, the sound reached them before the door even opened. Music spilled out into the hallway, loud and energetic. It was the kind of music that made the floor vibrate slightly. The grandparent paused for a second, taking a breath, then stepped inside. Bright lights filled the room. Decorations hung from every corner, balloons floated near the ceiling, and long tables were covered with colorful cloths. Everything looked just like the pictures the granddaughter had sent. Seeing it all together brought a small sense of pride. It had come together well. Groups of teenagers filled the space, laughing loudly, moving constantly. Phones were everywhere. Some were held up for photos, others for videos. Short clips were recorded again and again, with people posing, dancing, and repeating actions until they looked right on screen. The grandparents stood near the entrance for a moment, unsure where to go. No one seemed to notice them at first, and that was fine. They didn't want attention. They slowly moved to the side, finding a chair near the wall. From there they watched. The granddaughter was easy to spot. She was surrounded by friends, smiling wide, her energy bright. She wore something stylish, something chosen carefully for photos. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, replying to messages, adjusting angles, laughing at something on the screen. The grandparent smiled quietly. Seeing her happy mattered. That was the whole reason for this day. A few relatives came by to say hello. Short conversations, polite words, compliments about the decorations, the food, the music. The grandparent nodded, thanked them, asked how they were doing. Nothing deep. Just small talk that passed quickly. The music grew louder as time went on. A group formed near the center of the room, dancing and cheering. Someone shouted for another video. The granddaughter joined in, barely stopping to breathe. Her laughter carried across the room. At one point, the grandparents stood up and walked slowly around the space. They wanted to see everything up close. The food table was full, just like planned. Dishes were barely staying full as teenagers grabbed plates and moved on quickly. Drinks spilled, laughter followed. No one seemed to mind. The decorations were exactly as promised. Every detail had been placed carefully. Seeing them now, the grandparent felt a quiet satisfaction. The effort had not been wasted. They passed near the granddaughter and gently spoke her name, offering a soft smile. She looked up briefly, nodded, and said a quick thank you before turning back to her friends and her phone. The moment lasted only seconds. The grandparent didn't take it personally. They reminded themselves that this was her day. Teenagers lived in fast moments, and attention moved quickly from one thing to another. They returned to their seat, folding their hands in their lap. From there, they continued to observe. The noise, the movement, the constant clicking of phone cameras. It all felt overwhelming, but also fascinating. A world so different from the one they grew up in. Occasionally, someone would ask the grandparent to move slightly so they could get a better shot for a photo or video. Each time, the grandparent stood up and stepped aside without complaint. They didn't mind being out of the frame. There was a brief moment when the music stopped and someone announced it was time for cake. Cheers filled the room. Phones lifted again, ready to capture the moment. The cake was brought out, large and decorated perfectly. The granddaughter stood in front of it, smiling for the cameras. Friends gathered close, some pushing forward to be seen. The grandparents stayed back, watching from a distance. The candles were lit. A song began, loud and playful. The grandparents sang quietly, barely audible among the others. When the candles were blown out, applause followed. Someone shouted to do it again for another video. The moment repeated. Again and again. The grandparent waited patiently. After the cake was cut, the party returned to its usual rhythm. Music, movement, screens glowing. The grandparent felt a small ache in their legs and sat down once more. They thought about how different celebrations used to be. How moments were lived once, not recorded again and again. Still, they understood that times change. Meaning stays the same, even when the form is different. The granddaughter passed by again, holding her phone up, laughing with friends. She didn't stop this time. The grandparent watched her go, feeling a mix of emotions they didn't fully name. They reminded themselves that being present didn't always mean being noticed. Sometimes love worked quietly, in the background. As the party continued, the grandparents stayed until they felt it was enough. They didn't want to be in the way. Before leaving, they took one last look around the room. Everything was alive with energy. They found the granddaughter once more and gently told her they were heading home. She nodded again, distracted, and said she'd call later. The words sounded automatic, but the grandparents still smiled. Walking out into the quieter hallway felt like stepping into another world. The music faded behind them. The air felt calmer. On the drive home, the grandparent reflected on the day. There was no anger, no regret, just a quiet acceptance. They had done what they came to do. They had shown up. Back at the house, the silence returned. The grandparent removed their shoes, sat down slowly, and rested. They looked at their phone, half expecting a message. There was none yet. That was okay. Sitting there, they felt content in a simple way. Not because they had been thanked, or praised, or noticed, but because they had given freely. Sometimes love didn't stand in the spotlight. Sometimes it sat quietly at the edge of the room, smiling, happy just to be there. The next day passed slowly. The grandparent woke up with the usual routine, made tea, and opened the curtains to let in the morning light. The party already felt distant, like something that had happened in another world. There was no message yet, but that did not trouble them. Young people were busy. They reminded themselves of that. Late in the afternoon, the phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't the granddaughter. It was a relative. Someone closer in age, someone who usually didn't call unless there was a reason. The message was short and careful. It asked if the grandparent was sitting down. It asked if they had seen anything online. Confused, the grandparent replied that they had not. They didn't spend much time on social media. It felt loud and unnecessary most days. A few moments later, another message arrived. This one included a link. The grandparent stared at it for a long second before tapping the screen. The page loaded slowly. A familiar image appeared. It was the party. The decorations. The music. The room filled with teenagers. The video began to play. At first, the grandparent didn't understand what they were watching. It was edited quickly, with sharp cuts and exaggerated reactions. Text popped up on the screen. Music played loudly underneath it all. The granddaughter appeared, making faces, rolling her eyes, laughing. Then the words appeared. Jokes about the party. About how extra it was. About how it was paid for. About who paid for it. The grandparents saw themselves on the screen. Standing near the wall. Sitting quietly. Smiling awkwardly in the background. The video zoomed in on those moments, slowing them down, adding captions meant to be funny. Comments followed. Words flashed across the screen describing the grandparent as embarrassing. Old. Out of touch. Too serious. Too quiet. Too much. The granddaughter laughed in the video, pointing toward the camera, reacting to her own jokes. Friends appeared briefly, laughing along, adding gestures and expressions. The grandparent felt their chest tighten slightly. Not sharply. Not painfully. Just enough to notice. They watched the video all the way through. Once. Then again. The second time, they noticed more details. The way the clips were chosen carefully. The way certain moments were repeated to make them look worse. The way the tone shifted just enough to invite laughter at someone else's expense. The phone rested heavily in their hand. The relative sent another message. An apology. They said they didn't know how to say this gently. They said the video was spreading quickly. People were commenting. Sharing it. Liking it. The grandparent scrolled slowly. Comments filled the screen. Some laughed. Some added their own jokes. Some didn't know who the grandparent was, but that didn't stop them from commenting anyway. A few comments stood out. People saying the video was cruel. People asking why anyone would mock someone who helped them. But those comments were fewer, buried beneath laughter and reactions. The grandparent put the phone down. They sat quietly at the table, hands folded, eyes resting on the surface in front of them. The room felt smaller than usual. The ticking of the clock felt louder. There was no anger at first. No urge to respond. Just a deep, quiet sadness that settled slowly, like dust. They thought about the effort. The planning. The money carefully counted. The small sacrifices that had been made without complaint. All of it now reduced to a joke. A part of them wondered if they had misunderstood their place. If their presence had truly been unwanted. If the smiles they remembered were not what they thought they were. The phone buzzed again. Another relative. Then another. Some were angry on the grandparents' behalf. Some asked what they planned to do. Some said the video was wrong. The grandparent replied to each message politely. Short responses. They thanked people for their concern. They said they were fine. But inside, something had shifted. They went about the rest of the day quietly. Watered the garden. Ate a simple meal. The usual tasks felt heavier now, requiring more effort. In the evening, curiosity returned. The grandparent picked up the phone again and checked the video. The numbers had grown. More views. More likes. More comments. The granddaughter had replied to some of them with laughing emojis. With short remarks meant to keep the attention going. The grandparent noticed that their own name was never mentioned. They were simply referred to as, my grandparent. Reduced to a role. A character in a joke. They wondered if the granddaughter had thought about how it would feel. Or if the thought had never crossed her mind at all. A quiet question formed but remained unanswered. Later that night, the grandparent received a call from the same relative who sent the link. The voice on the other end sounded upset. They asked if the grandparent was okay. The grandparent said they were tired, but all right. They said young people didn't always understand the weight of their words. They said it would pass. After the call ended, the grandparent sat alone in the living room. The television was off. The house was silent. They thought about dignity. About how easily it could be overlooked. About how kindness, when taken for granted, could turn into something else. There was a moment when they considered calling the granddaughter. Just to ask why. Just to explain how it felt. But the phone stayed on the table. Some conversations required readiness on both sides. Before going to bed, the grandparent placed the phone face down. They didn't want to see the screen light up again. Lying in the dark, sleep came slowly. Thoughts moved in circles. Memories of the party mixed with the images from the video. Still, even in that quiet hurt, there was no wish for revenge. No plan to strike back. Only a quiet realization. Love given freely could still wound deeply when it was mocked. And sometimes, the deepest pain came not from strangers, but from those we believed we were closest to. The house was quiet again, the same way it always was in the early morning. The grandparent sat at the small table near the window, the phone resting nearby. Light filtered in softly, touching the walls and the worn surface of the table. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. They picked up the phone and opened the video once more. This time there was no confusion, no surprise. Only awareness. The sound was turned low. The images moved across the screen, familiar now. The laughter, the edits, the captions meant to invite strangers to laugh along. The grandparent watched without interruption. No shaking hands. No sharp breath. Just a steady gaze. Each moment felt heavier than the last. Not because of what was said, but because of what was missing. There was no trace of gratitude. No sign of understanding. No sense that the person being mocked was someone who loved deeply and gave freely. When the video ended, the grandparent didn't replay it. They placed the phone face down on the table and sat back in their chair. Silence filled the room. There was a time, long ago, when disappointment would have brought words, questions, a need to be heard. But age had changed that. Experience had taught them that not every wound healed through confrontation. They thought about the meaning of respect, how it was shown in small ways. A pause. A thank you. A moment of care. None of those were present in the video. The hurt didn't come from the money spent. That part no longer mattered. Money could be earned, saved, spent again. What stung was the way love had been reshaped into a joke for strangers. They remembered standing quietly at the party, moving aside for cameras, smiling even when unseen. Those moments had felt harmless then. Now they carried weight. The grandparent wondered when kindness had started to look like weakness. When patience had become something to laugh at. The phone remained silent. No message arrived from the granddaughter. No explanation. No apology. The grandparent didn't reach out either. Not because they didn't care, but because they were tired of explaining the value of decency. They made tea and carried the cup carefully to the living room. Sitting down, they stared at the wall for a long moment. Thoughts came slowly, one after another. They thought about how love changes shape as people grow. How children don't always recognize the weight of what is given to them. How some lessons arrive only after mistakes are made. There was sadness, yes. A deep, quiet sadness. But there was also clarity. They realized that reacting in anger would not teach respect. It would only add noise to something that already felt careless. They imagined calling the granddaughter, raising their voice, demanding the video be taken down. The image felt wrong. Not because it wouldn't be justified, but because it wouldn't bring peace. Instead, they chose stillness. The day passed slowly. The garden was tended to. Meals were eaten without much appetite. The television remained off. There was no desire for distraction. Messages arrived from relatives again. Some asked if the grandparent planned to respond publicly. Others said the video was getting more attention. A few suggested confronting her directly. The grandparent answered gently. They said they needed time. They said they didn't want to make things worse. As evening settled in, the house grew darker. Lamps were turned on one by one. Shadows stretched across the floor. The grandparent sat alone, holding the cup of tea that had long gone cold. They reflected on all the times they had chosen patience over pride, silence over argument, love over being right. This moment felt like another test of that same choice. There was disappointment, deep and heavy, but there was also restraint. They understood something important then. Respect could not be demanded. It could only be earned, and sometimes withdrawn. Without anger, without drama, the grandparent made a quiet decision inside. Not a punishment. Not revenge. Just distance. They would stop offering themselves where they were not valued. They would let the noise pass on its own. The phone remained face down. And in the quiet of the room, the grandparent chose dignity over reaction, and silence over spectacle. The video did not slow down. If anything, it moved faster than before. Views climbed, shares increased, and the comment count grew by the hour. The granddaughter continued posting other short clips, laughing, responding, riding the wave of attention that came with being noticed. The grandparent did not check the video that morning. They went about their routine instead. Breakfast was simple. The garden needed water. The quiet felt heavier now, but still familiar. Later that day, the phone buzzed again. Then again. Messages came from relatives, from people the grandparent had not heard from in years. This time, the tone was different. Someone said the comments had changed. Curious but cautious, the grandparent picked up the phone and opened the link once more. The video played as it always had, unchanged. But below it, the comment section looked different than before. The laughter was still there, but it no longer filled the space. New comments appeared near the top. Strangers asking questions. Not jokes. Not emojis. Real questions. Why would anyone mock their own grandparent? Didn't that person pay for the party? Some comments were longer, thoughtful. People wrote about their own grandparents. About how they missed them. About how they would give anything to hear their voice one more time, to sit quietly beside them again. A few shared stories of grandparents who worked hard, who sacrificed quietly, who never asked for praise. Others spoke about regret. About not realizing the value of that love until it was gone. The tone shifted slowly, then all at once. People began calling the video cruel. Not funny. Mean-spirited. They pointed out how kindness had been turned into content. How generosity had been treated like something embarrassing. Some defended the grandparent directly, even though they had never met them. They spoke about respect. About gratitude. About how age should never be a joke. The granddaughter's replies slowed. Where there had once been laughing responses and playful comments, there were now gaps. Silence between replies. Some comments were left unanswered entirely. The grandparent scrolled carefully, not rushing. Each message felt like a quiet hand placed gently on their shoulder. Not to fix the hurt, but to acknowledge it. They noticed comments calling out the editing. The zoomed-in moments. The captions designed to humiliate rather than entertain. People saw it clearly now. A few viewers tagged others, urging them to think before sharing. Some said the video reminded them to call their own grandparents. To check in. To say thank you. What had been meant as a joke no longer looked light-hearted. It looked careless. The grandparent felt something unexpected then. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Just a calm understanding. Truth had a way of surfacing on its own, without force. Messages from relatives reflected the same shift. They said people were defending the grandparent openly. They said the granddaughter was being criticized heavily now. Some worried it might go too far. The grandparent felt no joy in that. They did not want punishment. They did not want humiliation returned. They wanted understanding. The phone was set down again. The grandparent leaned back in their chair and closed their eyes for a moment. They thought about how quickly attention could change. How easily laughter could turn into reflection. How strangers, removed from the situation, sometimes saw things more clearly than those inside it. As evening approached, notifications continued to arrive. The grandparent did not open all of them. They knew what mattered now. The video had revealed more than the granddaughter intended. Not just to the public, but to herself, even if she did not realize it yet. The grandparent returned to their routine once more. Dinner was quiet. The house remained still. There was no sense of victory. Only a quiet truth settling into place. What had been shared for laughs had turned into a mirror. And the reflection was no longer flattering. The change did not happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow moving across the floor. The granddaughter noticed it first in the numbers. The steady climb of likes slowed, then stopped. New notifications no longer felt exciting. She refreshed the page again and again, expecting the usual rush. Instead, she saw comments she did not recognize. Long ones. Serious ones. Words that did not laugh along. Some questioned her choices. Others asked why she would treat her own grandparent that way. A few were blunt, calling the video hurtful and unnecessary. She tried to brush it off at first. Online opinions changed fast, she told herself. People were too sensitive. It would pass. But it didn't. Friends who had laughed at the video stopped tagging her. Group chats went quiet. A few people muted her posts. One friend sent a short message saying the video made them uncomfortable. Another said their own grandparents would have been heartbroken. The attention she had wanted began to feel different now. Heavy. Unwelcome. She opened the video again, watching it through new eyes. The jokes did not land the same way. The edits felt harsher than she remembered. The captions felt louder. Her smile faded. More critical comments appeared. Some people shared the video with messages that questioned her character. Others reposted it to make a point about gratitude and respect. The video was no longer being shared for laughs. It was being shared as an example. That realization settled deep. Late that evening, she deleted the video. The screen confirmed it was gone, but relief did not follow. Screenshots had already spread. Clips still appeared in replies. Once released, it could not be fully taken back. At home, the atmosphere changed. Her parents noticed the shift immediately. They had seen the comments, heard from relatives, received messages asking what was going on. Dinner was quiet. No phones at the table. No casual talk. Afterward, they sat her down. There was no yelling at first. Just firm voices and serious expressions. They asked why she thought it was acceptable to mock someone who had helped her so generously. They asked if she understood how it looked, how it felt. She struggled to answer. The words she had used online felt shallow now. It was just a joke. Everyone does it. It wasn't meant to be that serious. Those explanations sounded weaker out loud. Her parents reminded her of the effort that had gone into the party. The money. The time. The quiet sacrifices that were never discussed. They asked her to imagine how it would feel to see herself turned into a joke. Silence followed. The weight of the situation pressed in from all sides. This was no longer about a video. It was about values. About respect. About accountability. Her phone buzzed again with notifications, but she did not check them. The screen stayed dark. For the first time, the situation felt real. The laughter was gone. What remained was discomfort, regret, and the growing understanding that some mistakes did not disappear just because a post was deleted. Upstairs, the house felt tense. Doors closed more quietly than usual. Conversations were shorter. The granddaughter lay on her bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The attention she had chased no longer felt worth it. What she had wanted to be playful had become heavy, and the weight was not something she could scroll away from. It took time before the granddaughter came over. Days passed first. Quiet ones. Messages were typed and deleted. Calls were considered and postponed. When she finally arrived, it was without announcement, without a plan. She stood at the door looking smaller than she had at the party. The grandparent opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. There was no greeting full of warmth, but there was no coldness either. Just space. They sat at the table near the window. The same place where tea was often shared, where simple conversations usually lived. This time, the air felt different. The granddaughter kept her eyes down at first. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers twisting slowly. She did not reach for her phone. It stayed tucked away. She spoke quietly. Her voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. She said she was sorry. Not quickly. Not lightly. The words came out slow, like they had weight. She said she had not thought it would turn into what it did. She admitted she liked the attention. She admitted she hadn't considered how it would feel to be on the other side of the joke. There were no excuses this time. No laughter. No attempt to explain it away. The grandparent listened without interruption. They did not nod. They did not shake their head. They simply listened. When the granddaughter finished, silence settled between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. The grandparent finally spoke. Their voice was calm, steady, not raised, not sharp. They said the pain had not come from the money. That part had never mattered. What hurt was seeing love turned into something to laugh at. Seeing trust treated like content. They explained that generosity was not a performance. It was something given quietly, without expectation. When it was mocked, it made the giver feel small. They said trust had been broken, not because of a mistake, but because of how easily dignity had been ignored. The granddaughter listened now, eyes filling, but she did not interrupt. The grandparent did not threaten. They did not shame. They did not ask for the internet to be fixed or the damage erased. Instead, they spoke about respect. About how it showed up when no one was watching. About how it mattered most in private moments, not public ones. They said rebuilding trust would take time. Apologies were a start, but consistency mattered more. Actions would speak louder than words now. The granddaughter nodded slowly. She said she understood. She said she wished she could take it back. The grandparent acknowledged that feeling. They said regret was part of learning. But learning only mattered if it changed behavior. There was no hug at the end. Not yet. When the granddaughter stood to leave, the grandparent wished her well. Their tone was kind, but measured. At the door, the granddaughter paused. She turned and said thank you. Not for the party. For the honesty. After she left, the grandparent returned to the table and sat quietly for a while. The conversation had not fixed everything. It wasn't meant to. But something important had happened. The truth had been spoken without cruelty. And respect, though damaged, had been named as something worth earning back. Time moved forward in small, ordinary ways. Days returned to their usual rhythm. Mornings were quiet again. Tea was made. The garden was tended. The house felt the same, but the grandparent felt steadier inside. They did not carry resentment. There was no benefit in that. Holding anger would only give the moment more power than it deserved. Instead, they chose boundaries. Simple ones. Clear ones. They stayed kind, but no longer overextended themselves. Help was offered thoughtfully, not automatically. Presence was given, but only where it was valued. The granddaughter changed too, slowly and unevenly. She posted less. When she did, it was different. More careful. Less performative. The easy hunger for attention had been replaced by caution. She learned that online approval disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Likes faded. Trends moved on. What remained were screenshots, memories, and consequences that could not be filtered away. At home, conversations became more honest. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just real. The family spoke about respect, about responsibility, about the weight of actions that reached beyond a screen. There were awkward moments. Pauses where words felt hard to find. But silence was no longer used to avoid truth. It was used to listen. The relationship between grandparent and granddaughter did not return to what it once was. And that was okay. Some things change permanently. Trust, once cracked, does not snap back into place. But it could be rebuilt. Slowly. Carefully. Through consistency. Through humility. Through actions that showed growth rather than promised it. The grandparent watched this process without pushing. They understood that lessons learned too easily were often forgotten just as fast. What mattered was that the lesson had landed. Love was not content. Kindness was not a joke. And dignity was not something to trade for attention. One evening, the grandparent sat by the window as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room. They felt peace, not because everything was fixed, but because they had stayed true to themselves. They had chosen grace without surrender, boundaries without bitterness. In time, laughter returned to the family, quieter and more sincere. Shared meals felt warmer. Conversations felt grounded. The experience became something unspoken but remembered. A turning point. And in that quiet understanding lived the final lesson. Clout fades quickly, but character lasts forever.